Hey guys, this is Nick from Nick's Listening Space. Today we're going to take a look at the Topping D70 Velvet. My initial impressions with this DAC were that it sounded a bit like the Fuzzy Audio ZD3, which I just reviewed, and you can watch that video down below. And what do I really mean by that? I think that in a similar fashion, this DAC presents itself with a nice amount of richness and tonality in the mid-range that does lend itself to being perceived to being a smoother or perhaps a warmer DAC. Now, settling in for the day and just kind of listening to a wide range of tracks, you know, I listened to an album by Blood Orange. There's a track called You're Not Good Enough, which came out on one of his first tracks, or one of his first albums. And that's a track that has a lot of lushness in the vocals. And it's a track that really does tend to envelop the space and the room. And it's one that I found to be a very pleasurable listen on this DAC. Then kind of transitioning into something a little bit more detailed, I played an album by an artist called Shigeto, No Better Time Than Now. And this is an electronic-based album with a lot going on in the mix. And in that regard, it's something that when you listen to, you can really discern the layering going on. There's really great instrument separation there, or it's something that you really want to have a lot of instrument separation. Kind of walking away from that initial listening session, my interpretation was this is a warmer, lusher DAC than, say, my Topping D50S. Jumping into kind of build quality on this guy, what I'll say is that it's a really nice, hefty piece of aluminum that has been extruded. On the front and the back, there's kind of infill panels, with the front being this soft plastic infill. I don't believe this is a glass. It could be some sort of Gorilla Glass coating. I could be wrong. The volume knob is also aluminum as well, and it also has this soft plastic kind of on the front. There is a physical power button in the back, but then its standby button is on the front, and it's a capacitive button. I'm not a fan of these capacitive buttons. I just would rather have a physical button. That's just me. Its screen is more of a, I'll say, like an alarm clock style screen, but with better resolution than your 1980s alarm clock. I do think that the screen was kind of a missed opportunity to display bitrate. As far as I can tell, only can display volume, and there might be options for that in the menu that I have not discovered. And if somebody else knows how to display the bitrate on this, I'd really appreciate it. There is an indicator showing which input is selected, and there is also an indicator to show you which output is being selected. With this DAC, you do have options to play out via XLR or RCA, and you can toggle between those. So that's kind of a nice feature depending on how you want to have this integrated into your setup, which I talked a little bit more about in my Do You Need a Preamp video. You can kind of watch that video for a little bit more discussion on this guy. If we go around to the back, you get inputs for USB, optical, coax, and then there's also a Bluetooth antenna. You get RCA and XLR balanced out. And then lastly, you get a 12-volt trigger in out, and then your standard IEC power cable port. Currently at its price point of $350, I think that this is a good value. The remote control that comes with this guy is pretty much your standard Chi-Fi remote that comes with all of these components. You've got controls on here to toggle screen brightness. You have filter selection. You can also toggle between outputs, so you can toggle whether XLR or RCA. And then, of course, you can also mute. You can change inputs. It would be nice to have a nicer remote, but for this price point, what else can we expect? I guess unless these companies start getting in the business of making custom remotes, we're kind of stuck with these cheap devices. Now I want to talk about the sound quality of this guy, and in order to do that, I will compare it to my Topping D50S DAC, which came out now, oh, I don't know, like a handful of years ago. So it is an older DAC, but the Topping D50S is commonly referred to as a more reference-based DAC. I do think that the Velvet is a more mid-range focused DAC, kind of across the board when we compare it to the D50S. Now, that's not to say that the D70 Velvet is lacking in detail in any way. It's just that when we compare them side by side, the D50S does present itself as having more top-end energy. There is more of those refined kind of edges being etched into the track versus the D70 Velvet. I think the D70 Velvet perhaps is smoothing the edges out a little bit more. Now, people have also mentioned how the D70 Velvet is closer to an R2R DAC than a chip-based DAC. I can't really confirm that because I can't compare this to any ladder DACs currently. But what I will say is, really, I do believe this DAC presents itself as the more analog of the two. Where I think the biggest difference between these two DACs lies is in the top end. I think the D50S does have more energy in its top end, which then lends itself to a greater perception of detail and more nuance found in kind of those inner tonal textures. Or rather, like, you play certain types of songs like an album by Shigeto, which is an electronic based album, which I always talk about this album because I just think that the way that this album is mixed is just so incredibly layered, and with a really revealing DAC or something more transparent, we're able to peer very deeply into that and really pick out all of the things happening. And it's just a really incredible listening experience. And so when I played that same album on the D70 Velvet, we're getting a little bit more of a collapsed sound stage, and in a sense that things are a little bit softened on their edges now, and we're no longer getting this really great kind of separation. It's still there, and I really enjoy it, but there's something a little bit more magical that I'm getting out of my D50S that I'm not getting out of this. You know, Ozzy Osbourne just passed away, and I've been listening to a lot of his music lately because I used to listen to Ozzy Osbourne when I was in high school, and it had just been so many years since I really listened to his music. And I've been listening to The Blizzard of Oz, and you know, there's a song on there called Goodbye to Romance, and he sings really high, but his voice is so muted compared to the electric guitar on that track. The electric guitar, it just rips. Like that thing, like the electric guitar on that track shreds so far up into the highest octaves that, like, it does want to make your ears bleed. But by comparison to everything else going on in that track, it kind of, the electric guitar overshadows everything else going on in the mix. And at times you want to turn up the volume to get more of the low end or to get more of that vocal presence. And so on something like my D50S, that track it does tend to be a little sharp or overly sharp when I don't want it to be so sharp. And I find that a track like that, listening to it on my D70 Velvet, is then just more smoothed out. There's more of an enjoyment and a balance between the low and the high ends on that particular track. Whereas now, I don't feel the same sense or need to really increase volume to make the low end match what's happening in the high end or the highest frequency ranges. I think the mid-range performance on this guy is astounding, really. I mean, for its price point, I think this is the lush listening experience that I'd probably wager most people want to have, whether they know it or not. You know, with vocal jazz, listening to artists like Joy Oladukin or other female artists like Amy Winehouse, again, like, you know, it's what you'd expect to get from a more lusher grade piece of equipment, in the sense that it's not overly bright and I'm not getting any shrillness. In terms of the low end performance on the D70 Velvet, I can't really say that there's a major difference between what's happening here and my D50S. I only think that, again, like perhaps because of the mid-range presence found on this, there might be a little bit more bloom and perhaps a little bit more of a bloat on the bass here. I still think it's fast. I just don't think that it is as fast or speedy and quick like it is on my D50S. I think what this really translates to is a soundstage on the D70 Velvet that has less detail or less nuance or less micro textures in the top end compared to my D50S. I just think that the D50S, it has this ability to really like tickle you or tickle the back of your neck because of these really micro fine textures going on in particular tracks. If you're looking for more nuance and you really want those kind of like little nuanced things happening behind the scenes to really like come through and shine, then this DAC I don't think is the DAC for you. I think this DAC is a more lush experience, but then that lends itself to a lesser extent having less of a dynamics or less dynamic swings. And I think that the D70 Velvet, while it is very enjoyable, is also less three-dimensional than, say, my Topping D50S. I just think that the synergy that my D50S has with my tubes is perhaps creating more holographics and more kind of euphonics than what I'm getting with the D70 Velvet. Another really great album that I love is this album called Salute to the Sun by an artist called Matthew Halsall. And it's this really incredible kind of more modern jazz artist. And that's an album that has a lot of stuff going on in the mix, similar to a Shigeto album, only now it's more meditative. That album is, well, it sort of is a meditative album. And yeah, just when you play an album like that, there's such a desire to really get the most amount of detail extraction as possible out of the mix. And I'm left wanting a little bit more from this DAC than I thought I would, really. I really thought that this DAC was just going to obliterate my D50S in soundstage. But in all actuality, even though I think this has more air in the vocals, I tend to think my D50S produces a better three-dimensional soundstage. And it's only because of that top-end energy that really jumps out. And then when you listen to layered albums, an album like No Better Time Than Now, or, you know, an album like Salute to the Sun, do you really get a sense of what a more transparent, kind of better revealing DAC can do for your sound? Kind of just my final conclusions are that the Topping D70 Velvet is for somebody who really is looking to get a very lush, almost laid back, mid-range focused sound. But then I think the caveat there is you probably also have brighter speakers or you have a brighter amplifier. my thought process is to get a DAC that runs transparent, that is revealing, that is more of a reference grade DAC, or rather the philosophy there is extract as much as you possibly can from the mix and reveal as much as you possibly can. And then from there, you know, add color on top, find ways of integrating tubes or other means. So that's kind of how my current reference system is laid out. I don't necessarily think that's wrong, but that's just how I have done it. And if you were building a system today and you were interested in this DAC, and let's say you started off with this DAC, I would then be thinking about what is the most transparent amplifier I can pair with this? What is the most transparent and revealing speaker that I can put after this? And I say that because my lasting impressions are that I was desiring a little bit more of that energy, a little bit more of that kind of defined edge, if it were. Another reviewer in the community has commented about the filters on this DAC and how the filter number 3 is his favorite because it does that. Filter number 3 being the filter that will help produce more of that refined edge. But I mean, you know, I think we're splitting hairs when we're talking about the filters on this DAC, and really, for me, that's not my biggest concern. I have several ways within my system that I can tweak the overall sound, and I'm not necessarily interested in doing that through some sort of defined EQ that I set on my computer. I'll just let you know, but I did not really dig into the filters or what you can do on this when you plug it into a computer. You know, I really question if you shouldn't just save more money for a better DAC, or if you really are looking to save money, why not go with a lesser expensive DAC? And I'm more inclined to tell you to skip this version. And if you're looking to buy a DAC at this price point, get something like the Fozzy Audio ZD3, start there, because I think you can save $150. And for less than this, you're going to get something that is very comparable to what this sounds like. If you want to spend more money, then my recommendation would be to probably save money and try to splurge and get the D70 Octo, which would be the step up from this. Now, I have not heard the Octo, but from what I gather, the Octo is a better Velvet in every sense of the way. But, you know, take that with a grain of salt because I have not listened to it. If you guys like this review, please hit the bell notification down below, like, thumbs up, and also, if you guys have heard this DAC, I'd love to know your opinions about this particular DAC. And if you found something that's better, that you think is of similar kind of sound character, I'd also love to hear what your thoughts are on that as well. I will be doing the Topping D50 version 3, which hopefully I'll have posted in the next week to 2 weeks. And then I'll also be doing a review of the Fozzy Audio GR70, which should hopefully be posted here within the next week. So anyways, thanks for watching, guys. I really appreciate the support and all the great, nice comments from you guys. So yeah, thanks everybody. Have a good day. Bye-bye.